video is going to be pretty different than what I normally do because today I'm joined by our lovely guest, Traitor Rus, who is the lead programmer for Town of Salem 1 and 2. So, Russ, thanks for taking the time to hop on with me.
Thanks for having me.
Just to catch everybody up, last video I asked viewers to comment the questions that they would most want answered by the developers, and boy did people respond. So I took some of the most liked comment questions and a couple that just personally amused me, and Russ is going to answer them for us today. Now, Russ, I know not all of these questions fell into your area of expertise, and that you checked these against what some of the other developers said. Can you tell us a little bit about what their roles are?
A lot of questions that get asked are role questions and like really fine grain, like really in the weeds, like deep role knowledge questions. And Achilles does a lot of the role code. He kind of came up with the original idea of the game. So I like to run questions by him. And of course, he works closely with Pyro and Shape a lot on role ideas and role balance ideas and the rest of the team as well. But so I did talk to those guys, of course. And then, of course, Trader Blue is the guy for art, animation, and everything that makes the game look good and have the Salem feel.
Blue is so helpful. I have to ask them for assets all the time for thumbnails, and they're so helpful.
Yeah, Blue loves having the press kit have amazing things in it and just super huge, great feel for the look and feel of the game. So that kind of leaves me in this awkward place of kind of having a lot of diverse responsibilities, but very few questions were probably like right in my wheelhouse. But I'm very happy to talk about the project since I kind of have my hand in a lot of things.
Yeah, all right, so do you want to just hop right in?
Sure thing.
All right, question one. Have there been any roles that were added to the game which received the complete opposite reaction than what you expected? Whether it was a role that you didn't think would be great with the community, or a role that you expected to be a fan favorite but got minimal to a negative response?
At the risk of sounding pandering, I know you did a video where you talked about roles that had the highest day one leave rates and the highest day one like not leaving rates.
Mm-hmm.
I probably phrased that. Guardian Angel being so well liked was something that I think we didn't particularly have that much insight on. And
Really?
right, so when we originally had Admirer V1, the your video just come out about that, and of course shout out to Kurt, of course, for pulling a lot of that data together as
Mm-hmm.
well. And so some of the tending aspects that we put in, and so the Guardian Angel love definitely kind of came into that role rework because we realized like it was a neat mechanic, and since we don't have neutral benign, it made sense to sort of like make it work that way.
Yeah, a lot of people were upset that neutral benign wasn't a thing anymore, and that kind of surprised me. I kind of tried to like prepare people for it. I had a video about why Survivor wasn't healthy for the game when I found out that Town of Salem 2 was going to be a thing. But I really like that you found a way to work that mechanic into a town role. I think Admire is in a pretty healthy spot right now.
Yeah, and that was Achilles' brainchild for sure. But I think it's good. It's still a controversial role, but seeing your video defending it and really talk about some of the strategies with it, I think some of the strategies you came up with are actually pretty good advice. If I had to criticize the role, it would be that it's not obvious how you should play it when you first read the role card. So like I think your strategies are like really good in terms of like, okay, well you get two, so go ahead and throw one out there, have it be declined. That's okay. That's part of the game. You're gathering information. Really good, but it's not like an obvious strategy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think that's one of the reasons it's probably still not popular. It's that it's just not obvious how you should play it at first. So you really need to have good game knowledge to kind of understand what you're supposed to do from both ends of it, right?
Yeah, I get that. All right, well, that's not what I was expecting. Guardian Angel of all things. It's a very popular role. All right,
Yeah, well, you knew that. So yeah, the
yeah.
admirer. There you go.
All right, question two. How long have stats been tracked in Town of Salem 1, and are they being tracked currently in Town of Salem 2?
So I know that we had ranked play, and therefore achievements and stuff is as long as 6 years ago. So achievements require a certain amount of stat tracking because you don't know when you've won 25 games is this or 5 games is that without having some stats that are being tracked, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the leaderboards were just an extension of that, and I may have worked on the original leaderboards like 5.5 years ago or something. So I feel like we had a lot of those stats on the server before we even had like a client thing for it. So they're at least 6 years old in Town of Salem 1, and I think for the most part the stats we track are just things we have to track to make achievements work. So until we feel like leaderboards or something people are screaming for, there's probably nothing being tracked that isn't needed to be tracked for some reason. We do track a lot of win rates and stuff that we use to calculate ranked elo stuff. So you may notice there's ranked practice. So there's like already tracking into place so that we could do the elo adjustments such that if you win with a serial killer, you get more elo than if you win with town or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I
So
remember.
it's mostly win rate tracking. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh no, you're all good. I was just gonna say, I remember at one point, I think it was season 5, we would get 18 elo every time you won as executioner turned jester. So the games just turned into trying to get your ex target killed at night as soon as possible. So I was just, I don't know.
Wow. That's so meta. I would okay. That takes me by surprise. That's interesting. 18 specifically.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
specifically
I mean
18. Well, I was a big
that
ranked player
seems
at the
like
time.
that seems like a bug.
It was a
It
bug.
seems
That's
like
why I'm bringing it
yeah.
up.
Yeah. Okay. Neat. A long time ago I made this Google sheet where you could put everyone's elo into it and say who won and lost, and it would say what the elo should be. And then we use that to like test things internally, but I don't remember testing anything as specific as that. But that really takes me back. That's a long time ago. That
It
would have
was a
been like
while ago.
season 3. I'm thinking of season 3 or 4, but
No,
season
before
5 was
my
still
time.
yeah.
So question number 3. I know you and I talked about this just like in DMs, but for the sake of telling YouTube, do the devs feel that vote for role or vote for alignment should be a viable strategy, even if not a foolproof one? The new roles, Doom, Ritualist, New Invest, make vote for role less powerful, but given the lack of more drastic nerfs, it seems the devs are okay with it as a strategy.
I think we had a long conversation about this,
Yeah,
so I'm
you and
kind
I
of
did.
scared. I'm thinking like what's the medium length answer to this is a tricky question, but um I guess I'll start with a non-answer that goes back to our conversation of I'll just start with it. We'll get to an answer hopefully. Town gets certain resources like they get trials, they get discussion. They have a lot of mechanics that they need to use to do their job. They also get chat. So if you give Town 3 trials a day and you give them the ability to chat, and you don't say like, oh well, you can't be voted back up on trial a third time. Like it totally makes sense to vote up someone and then let them off and vote up a second person and vote up the original person with the intent of finally hanging them, right? Like
Hmm.
that strategy makes sense because you got a lot more information than if you would have just like hung the first person and been done with it, because you got a lot more time to gather information over the day and get everyone on the same page. So that's, since Town is the uninformed majority, like they have to get that time to get on the same page, right?
Hmm.
So if you go to 2 trials a day, then you like quote unquote nerf that a little bit, and things like that have happened. So there's a lot of metas. So when you have roles like Doomsayer and Ritualist, you do like push back on this idea that like Town can just openly claim their roles as a, or even as a lot of mayors know, um, other bad things can happen to you as
Oh,
well.
of course.
So there's a lot of bad things that can happen in Town of Salem 2, if people know your role, but not being able to openly claim. The problem with vote for alignment became like if I'm a seer, it's really hard to kind of like say what I know without saying what both my targets were, which is
Hmm.
effectively like saying you're a seer. So that's why there was like some ideas like, well, okay, maybe Town Investigatives should be able to say their role, and we'll kind of alter the mechanics that way, right?
Yeah.
So So it's important that town have those tools. So the question becomes like, even if we didn't like it, like what's the answer to do about it? So like in a custom game mode, it would be totally valid to be like, you know what? We're not even gonna have trials. We're just gonna have prosecutors and vigies, and we'll have 0 trials per day. And that would be cool in a custom game mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm perfectly willing to say like, okay, cool, let's eventually try to get all the pieces into place to make that game mode and see how people like it. I think that's a great idea. It would be fun to play. Most people would go back to playing like ranked classic though, right? Like I think the current number of trials that we have per day is, 2 or 3, somewhere in that range is kind of what people think of as Town of Salem. So it's tricky to do anything too drastic. So I think vote for roll is just what happens when you optimize for the current rules. Like I think it's a consequence of I think it's just a consequence of people really understanding how the mechanics work and what's in the best interest of town, how to use the daylight most effectively to get as much information as they can.
Right.
So it's not that I love the strategy. I just think it's just like optimized gameplay
It's
is
like a
what it is.
necessary
Right.
evil in order to have other aspects of the game work as intended.
I think so. It's always cool to try to break a rule and be like, well, maybe, and we did, right? We did add Doomsayer and Ritualist, as you noticed. So
Mm-hmm.
we are interested in like, well, how can we have counterplay to this? Like, if openly claiming is town and putting everyone's roll up is it, like, how can we kind of change how different roles work to make it so that town has more to play around? And that's something we look at, right? But, um, if you upset the apple cart too much, then it kind of like becomes less fun in other ways that can be hard to predict. So we're always kind of tinkering with that stuff.
That's a great answer. That's gonna keep everyone happy.
Thank you.
That was a good job. Okay, question number 4. What vision did you have in mind when trying to figure out how to make Town of Salem 2 different and unique from Town of Salem 1? Was there anything in the first game you disliked so much that you made it a mission to get rid of it in the second game?
I think the obvious thing that people notice is that kingmakers are not gone, but a lot of kingmaker scenarios are different. You see that with the pirate leaving the game. Like a lot of roles just kind of leave the game when
Mm-hmm.
they're done. So that was probably the biggest single change, honestly, just mechanically. And then there are some roles that cause problems, and some of these roles had multiple incarnations in Town of Salem 1. But if you think about roles like Disguiser and Transporter, they've both had these attributes of making the game very hard to understand what actually happened. You get a lot of bug reports. You spend a lot of time tracking down something that never really happened. So the question was, how can roles that add to that like deception be something that aren't just impossible to unravel what actually happened during a bug report or a report or whatever. So that's one reason that roles like I guess like Trickster work different than like Transporter did. It's
Mm-hmm.
still a lot easier to understand like what happened, right?
Totally.
Um, also like just roles that cause people to leave the game and reporting issues, as I said. So like, yeah, like, do you get Disguiser, like one version of Disguiser? I don't know how many versions it went through in Town of Sam 1. You
Oh,
would
you know
probably know
what?
better than me.
I did because I made a couple cahoots for PipeTron to play on stream, and that was one of the
Hmm.
questions. It had 3 different versions. It had the original body swapping one. It had the you disguise yourself as them, and then if you get killed, you appear as them. And then it has the current one.
The body swapping one was like one of the most confusing just all around. And then like people would just leave, of course, if they got roll, like a lot of Mafia apparently, according to you and Kurt's findings, right? So those are the things. I think another thing I'd have to talk about was having the game be more cinematic. Was also something that I think was in the early vision. I would say like the vision itself is probably even more cinematic than the existing game, where originally we wanted everything to happen at night to somehow be something that you could watch like a cinematic. That was really ambitious, and it wasn't something that could really get done and in a state that people felt like it wasn't just like super passive to watch, to the point of detract, because a lot of people want to get in and start chatting or writing in their wills, etc. But like we always wanted to see how cinematic it could be too. So
I
that
think
was a
y'all have been
goal.
doing a great job with that, especially with the new serial killer kill animation. Like, I think it's great. I think keep it up.
Cool. Well, that's all blue, but
Oh,
that's
thank you,
like such
Blue.
a yeah, blue's great at coming up with that kind of stuff, and it does take a lot of time, and all the roll silhouettes too. One of the reasons we started making those, and I think they have a lot of great texture they give to the game, or even your roll card, but the unique silhouettes also were meant so that like when you see someone in a cinematic, you understand that it's their role and not them. We're so used to this idea that like you are this role, but it needed to be like even in the new jail scene. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to see that;
I
it's
have,
brand new,
yeah,
but
yeah.
cool. Well, the jailer can walk around like as the jailer, so it lets you kind of be like an incarnation of your role that people don't necessarily know who it is. So the silhouettes were needed to solve that problem.
I wasn't planning on asking this, but since you brought up the silhouettes, do
Sure.
y do y'all plan to add like a colored in version of that? Because I know it's been driving Pipe crazy because he has to put them in his thumbnails. And if I have the chance to ask, I'm gonna ask for him.
Well, shout out to you for doing Pipe's dirty work. He can message me, but what's up, Pipe? My DMs are open, but we don't have any plans to do that because
Oh
that would have
shit.
never occurred to us. It never occurred to us, but like I get that you guys like cool art assets and stuff, so maybe I saw like the old Jester or whatever. So it'd be good to. I get why that would be wanted. I think the goal was that you could immediately understand by being shadowy. You understand that it's a silhouette.
Yeah, like
That's
a
why
hidden
they're
role.
shadowy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like if even if you don't know all like infinity roles and what their silhouettes look like, you go, okay, well it's shadowy, so you know I know it's like a hidden thing,
Yeah.
right? So that was the reasoning behind it. So yeah.
It's a totally selfish question for me to ask. I just would feel bad if I didn't. I'll go back.
No,
I'll
it's
go back
great.
to the regular questions. Uh,
That's totally fine. That was a good one.
so I know on Reddit when y'all did the Q&A a while back, I know this got answered, but for the sake of telling as many people as possible, question 5, is there a chance the Mafia faction will return, or are you going to add some other faction? And they say, also thank you, Dev, for making this awesome game.
You're welcome. In terms, I guess like so, as you guys notice, like a lot of Mafia's roles and abilities were already folded into the Coven.
Mm-hmm.
So adding the Mafia would would require for them to be like a brand new faction, and then it becomes like, well, is the Mafia the best? Like, um, would that be the best way to express the mechanics that we feel like the game needs? Like, there's four horsemen, for instance, and they have
Mm-hmm.
unique mechanics. So it's like, if we had enough mechanics to do a unique faction, does Mafia make sense for those? And that's what would have to be true for the Mafia to return. But having said that, like the Coven, people generally stick in a Coven game, and there were, as you know, that a lot of people were leaving as Mafia. So
Yeah.
it feels like Coven's in a better place just from watching people. Like people seem to be happier to play as Coven. So there's not a huge impetus to reintroduce the Mafia, but we get that they have like a lot of historic and lore identity in the game. So um I feel like the Mafia probably would come back more as an aesthetic set of things than like a set of roles, but a lot of that is like Achilles's wheelhouse. So uh, right now, I think it's more likely that we release we get to like the full release of the game before we look at like adding a whole new faction, because I think Apocalypse kind of serves as that other faction for all any games. So we were kind of talked into removing the one apocalypse limit already. So
And that was a
I feel
great
like
choice.
that. I'm glad you like it. So I feel like there's enough factions right now for like all any, so it becomes like, well, what do we need? Do we need like a four faction all any or whatever, or like why aren't the neutrals kind of doing their job there, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
That was a rambling answer, but sorry,
We love rambles.
that's me.
That's what people are here for. Question 6. What was your biggest programming challenge when making Town of Salem 1 and 2?
So I'm gonna take your meaning mine because like I realize other people had other challenges, but this will
Mm-hmm.
just be a selfish answer. But when I started, like we had a flash game with Town of Salem 1, and we had a Kickstarter on Kickstarter. Like basically, we were on the hook to make a mobile game, so we made a Cocos 2DX. That was the game engine port for the mobile games, and then we still had this flash game, and that quickly became hard to keep up both code bases. So then we turned around and ported things to Unity, and there were very good reasons that we went down the path we did, but it became really hard because we essentially made the same game 3 times for
Oof.
TOS 1, and each of those game engines had their own unique set of things that didn't work quite right, or challenges, or things that weren't just like out of the box solutions. So unifying all the code bases to be able to have like one solution that could do Android, web, iOS, and Steam was like a pretty challenging endeavor. I think that's the hardest thing we did.
All right. Yeah, and also with the Unity port, the game just looked so much better. You could tell there was so much effort put into it.
One it was very hard because the original Town of Salem 1, the original Flash game,
Mm-hmm.
with the old wooden frames and everything, and I'm sure you're gonna find some great graphic to throw up of this awesome interface.
Oh, of
I'm sorry, I
course.
put you on the hook. I put you on the hook, but it just had everything open all the time. You had a graveyard and player list and role list and so many things. And the idea that you could play that on an iPhone 4 or whatever, that was like even smaller than what people carry in their pockets now. It was clear that we were going to have to redo the UI. And a lot of that, like me and Blue spent a lot of time wireframing, just like boxes for where your thumbs would want to go to be able to open. So we had to have a solution to tab out a lot of the UIs that would have been open all the time for people on a phone, and then figure out how that had to relay for like an iPad or something bigger,
Mm-hmm.
or even bigger on a PC screen. So that was a huge challenge too, just from a UI UX perspective. And so that was just one of the ones where, you know, Blue just had to grind and grind and grind and figure out what looked good. And then and I think we ended up making the colors a lot warmer too, or Blue did. They were just a little more saturated before, so I think the UI colors really got to pop because we ended up redrawing it anyway for Unity more because like the old UIs just didn't work for a mobile like a phone layout. So we kind of had to redo them anyway. So luckily we got to go in and clean up stuff that had been around since the very beginning, back when there was like literally no staff and it was just Achilles, burning the midnight oil, right?
Mm-hmm. Again, y'all did a great job. Question
Thank
number
you.
yeah. Question number 7. I never see vampires in a Town of Salem 2 game that isn't Dracula's Palace, which basically means never with how many people actually play the mode from my experience. Will vampires get a larger debut in the future? And if so, I would assume Vampire Hunter would come too, right? That's a long one.
I like the question. So like the question you have to consider is like if people really loved the vampire mechanics, it's like you see like let me rephrase. I'm sorry. This started poorly. Okay. Um a lot of people want to see a full-blown vampire faction. Like that's requested a lot, but like as it's also like Dracula's Palace isn't super hop in place either. And role conversion mechanics are like super controversial. So there's a few reasons there, and people, I'll give you a two for a lot of people. Like, well, are vampires going to come to the custom game mode, or the Wandering Souls going to come to the custom game mode? And it's like, the Wandering Souls would work kind of. I mean, those have problems when you introduce Coven, because then you kind of like know who was in your faction or not. And
Mm-hmm.
I think vampires have less fundamental problems than Wandering Souls, but vampires do have they benefit from having the limited role list that kind of keeps them out of the way of a lot of the roles that really um, don't work well with their mechanics. So that's sort of the problem. It's just they're a really controversial thing, but they do fundamentally change the game. So it is a fun game mode, but it can also be like unpopular for time to time. But really doubling down and trying to fix the problems with something that's unpopular is like kind of a problematic place to start out, where it's just probably more likely that someone has an idea that seems like something that people are going to be really excited about. So I think vampires are kind of like, they're probably not going to get expanded anytime soon. Although that's still kind of Achilles' job, but I think it's a strong prediction just because those conversion mechanics have been controversial for a very long
Yeah.
time, right?
I mean, how many times have we seen games where somebody gets converted to a vampire and then immediately leaves the game, or like yells at the person who converted them in chat? Like it's not pretty.
People seem to really want to know what their mission is from the get-go and do it, because like even Amni, people really criticize Amni. I think part of the reason, and people like the choice mechanic, they say bring back the choice mechanic. That's a popular fix that people request. So it seems like if people get to make a choice, they're more okay with not knowing their fate, because at least they get to kind of choose their fate. But if you have your fate thrust upon you, um, and that changes what your mission is, that's something that I think a lot of people don't like. That they're like, no, I was doing this other thing and now my plans have been changed unexpectedly. So that just seems like it's something that's unpopular with a lot of people.
And then let's talk about Vampire Hunter a little bit. I have some very strong opinions about Vampire Hunter. Um,
Cool.
I think if you need one role to counter another role, it was never a healthy interaction to begin with. Um, and also, of course, we joke about Vampire Hunter reading Vamp Chat and it just being completely unusable. What do you think about adding Vampire Hunter into Town of Salem too? Is that at all a possibility?
I think that currently with vamps being where they are, it's not super needed. I guess the idea of countering, I'll start with that first though. When you're designing a game, there's a concept of play and counterplay.
Mm-hmm.
So I do this thing and then you counterplay is this thing. I think the idea that it's like the counterplay is, oh, we'll just have this role be in the game, is what makes it a little less healthy, because it's not really a decision you made. It's just, okay, this role can read the chat. So I think um if there was some theoretical world years in the future where the vampire faction like it gets extended and rebalanced and whatever, um, it's perfectly likely that town would get new roles with new abilities that like provide counterplay to what it is that this extended vampire faction would be able to do. What that looks like is maybe a little different. I will give you sort of like an example of something that has a lot more counterplay though. If you think about the insanity mechanic, where someone, any town visiting role can visit you to prevent you from going insane.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that just has a ton more counterplay. But then there's multiple levels, because you can pretend to need town to visit you for some other reason if you're an evil. So there's like multiple layers of play where on the one hand an evil can pretend that something happened to them for some reason to get town to try to counterplay the evil thing that never happened. So I think with social deduction games, having more of that texture is something that seems to be what motivates people like it's what motivates us to design certain roles with the some of the newer ways that they've been designed. So like with vampires, you wouldn't say like, well, why would I pretend to have gotten bitten, right? Because that's not how the mechanic works.
Mm-hmm.
So um the deception part really isn't like super there for that. I'm rambling again, but like that's sort of the problems with it. I think you're kind of on the right track. So if Vampire Hunter came back, I have a feeling like it would be mechanically different. And we just like the name of the role because it's a cool. I mean, it's a really cool theme, right?
Yeah, it's a cool name. Love it.
Everyone likes like Blade and stuff. So
Yeah. All right, we'll move on to question 8. Were there any cut rules from Town of Salem 1 that made it into Town of Salem 2? And they say, also a big fan of what you guys have done so far.
um I made a note of this, but I don't remember the story behind it, so I'm sorry. But I think one of the roles that kind of came in that was an older idea that sort of managed to come together with Shroud. Um, like it has a very unique killing mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I don't know exactly when that would have been cut. I don't know that it was cut per se, other than like maybe we had the idea later and it just kind of like came together for this game though. So I think we've had more ideas that have just changed because a lot of times it's important to rework roles to fix problems. So like adding new ones or cutting things like, gosh, there's probably a ton of stuff that ended up on the chopping block, right?
Right, yeah.
For Traitors, we redesigned Jester about 30 times before we found something that worked. We just knew we wanted a Jester. So I know we're not talking about that, but it's
Well, we have a question about Traitors coming up.
okay, cool. Well, we'll just stick to your order. So
Okay.
I don't have a great answer for that one, sadly. Yeah,
That's all
we
right.
just kind of have ideas when we need them a lot of
I
times.
mean, no is a totally acceptable answer.
No,
All right, then we'll
there
move
are
on.
no cut roles.
There are no cut rules in the game.
Right.
All right, we'll go to the next one then. What are your thoughts on other variations of Mafia slash Town of Salem and the mechanical differences they use? So I'm thinking like Throne of Lies or like just Mafia the party game, stuff like that.
One of the things that we noticed in other social deduction games was that games that gave people stuff to do after they were dead, and I'm not just meaning like, hey, let's talk to the medium or whatever, or get resurrected, um, that sort of thing. Those games offered people a lot. If you're trying to stick with friends and play with friends and you die night one, that's kind of like um, not the best. So a lot of games that do that well are really impressive. And so funnily enough, Ghost Town was was something we put in, and I realize most people will not be playing with Ghost Town on, but it is a fun and unique experience, and it's based on things that we noticed some other games did well, and then also the ghost bets. So I know that's not super deep about like Throne of Lies or whatever. I know those games have tons of roles and they're cool, but a lot of times we're more interested like in what they're able to do in terms of like a very broad um oh look, there's fun stuff to do while you're dead, rather than like, oh, this role specifically has this mechanic that's cool, right?
Right.
um so that's why Ghost Town happened.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. And then the next one is, got any tips for aspiring game developers?
Sure, yeah. This is a cool question. I love this question.
Yeah, this question's from an old friend of mine.
Awesome. I remember just like a long time ago wanting to be a game developer. It can feel so daunting to know just how to get your foot in the door, what you should do. Um, so I guess here's a pitfall. I think a lot of aspiring game developers fall in love with AAA game titles and they come up with AAA game ideas. And the problem with that is like you can have the best idea in the world if you need 100 people to execute it. Like the odds that that's not going to be how you make your break. And your idea may be fantastic, but it's a lot better to figure out how to have very credible ideas when you're starting out that can work, that a handful of people could realize, and even opportunities to use modding or prototyping in Unreal or Unity. Your ideas are good, and really focusing, and this depends on the type of game you want to make.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're into, for instance, platformers or racing games, understanding game feel, there are books on game feel that are quite good that help you understand just what it means to hold a controller and control an avatar in a way that feels good. To the far other end of really like reading books that help you understand how to make simulation games if you're into The Sims or RimWorld or those types of games. And of course, for social deduction, it can be really good to suss out those types of ideas with communities of people who like to invent their own roles or role ideas for games like Town of Salem or modders. So picking something that would be needed to do a mod or a prototype, whether it's 3D modeling or sound or programming, or better yet, like a little bit of all three until you find out what you're good at, is great. And then get involved in game jams once you feel like you can offer a game jam team something to do.
That's awesome. I think a lot of people are going to find that pretty helpful. I have no knowledge of any sort of game development, anything. Uh, so
I
forgive
think
me for not
you're
being able to go super into detail with follow up questions.
I think like when it comes to design though, like your videos show that you know how to condense very complicated ideas down into a short form of content. So
Oh, thank
a lot
you.
of times you can take a very complex topic that people have spent pages and pages on the internet arguing about and make a 3-minute video of it that makes it very clear. So that is a very useful skill that's a part of game design. So not many people have that ability to crystallize something down into the short form. I think that's very difficult.
Oh, thank you.
So you're welcome.
We got the Traitors in Salem question coming up now. It's
Right on.
all it says is what's the future of Traitors in Salem?
Um, right. That's a great question. Um, as many people know, we are a small team. There's
Mm-hmm.
not a super lot of employees at Blank Media Games. So getting Town of Salem 2 to through the early access period to a full launch is 100% of most people's day. And if other obligations come up because servers crash on another game or a DDoS attack happens, then
Oh
that gets
God,
added
you've
on.
jinxed it now. You've jinxed it.
That just adds to the day. It doesn't remove the idea that we have. So I think Traitors was a great game. We tried to offer a lot of cool stuff like built-in proximity chat. The last major thing that we did was making it free to play to really give it a chance that if players want to check it out and see what they like, they can play it. So like right now that's where it stands, until we have a reason to reevaluate our priorities. But right now Town of Salem 2 appears to be the title that people are most energized about that we could be working on. So we have to deploy our people to the place that's getting the most love and energy from the community. So
Mm.
that's Town of Salem 2 at the moment.
What are the devs' views on mods like better quality Town of Salem and quality of life mod?
I think we have like the best modders in the world. Those guys are really cool. And I think originally, if you roll way back, like mods were this huge unknown element that we found a little bit scary.
Mm.
Because like what kind of bugs and exploits are they going to open up? And already we have had people that were trying to use exploits to set their roles or so they're really two categories, but the mods that are mentioned do not fall under the malicious categories at all. If anything, we learn about exploits from our modders before like other people like they would know first because they're so deep in the code that they find it just through reading through the code. So we are really lucky they're as cool as they are, and I think our game is a lot less exploitable, a lot more stable, and a better experience for everyone because we have such cool modders. So we just think very highly of of that group of players. So they are awesome. So those mods are cool, and it's just tricky because at the same time, like we should probably have some sort of guidelines for like here's what mods can do and here's what mods can't do, but we kind of rather just have an open dialogue with people who are cool and kind of get where the line is of like we don't want to give players an unfair advantage by having it, but like if it improves your ability to um do this or that thing, like maybe you like more colorful chat or less colorful chat or whatever it is, those things are great. So that's sort of the answer to that is that our modding communities generally like a pretty cool group that understands how to police themselves really well.
Yeah, and honestly,
So we're lucky.
I was just talking about this the other day. I think you guys have such a great mentality on that because I know a lot of developers could be a lot more freaked out about it, right? Like, oh, I've worked so hard on this thing. I don't know what people are going to do with it. Um, I know you and the modders have a lot of open communication there, and I think that's so admirable. I
Yeah,
just
tons. The stance is like don't be disruptive. There have been some cases where it's like I think it was Kurt saying like I'm gonna write a mod that lets me unfriend like 500 people or send 500 it was like hundreds because some handful of streamers would have a problem where they just needed to do something at a much faster scale, and we're like if you could do this many a second, that would be cool, and it may take longer but at least it won't like slow the game down for everybody or whatever weird requests. Like they've been really cool at figuring out a way to oblige us on a lot of things, going out of their way sometimes to keep from being disruptive to other people.
yeah, I'm glad that you have like good actors.
Me too.
And then we have the last question, which comes courtesy of my autocorrect. Anytime I have to mention this in a script or back when I played on iPad, and that question is, why did you spell jailer with an O?
I messaged this to Achilles because this was like one of those things that probably existed very early on, and he replied back, "LOL."
That's it. That's the answer.
So I didn't. Yeah, LOL. For a while though, if you Google search "jailer" with an O, Town of Salem was the top hit. I recently tried to confirm, and
Well, of
I feel like
course
we've
it
been
was. It's like
displaced.
it's the only thing. I had never heard jailer with an O before until
So I
then.
think there's an old spelling that's like GAOLOR. So I think there's probably some old timey thing, but who knows? Who knows if it's just like Achilles felt like it was old timey, or it's just like the original Tom of Salad. That's what people will have to figure out, right?
All right, the answer is lol. Okay.
The answer is LOL. I'm so sorry, but that's literally the best I could do.
That's fine. That's great. If that's the answer, that's the answer.
It is the answer, unfortunately.
All right. Well, that was the last one I had. Is there anything else you want to add on? You want to tell the fine people at YouTube?
Hello, fellow gamers. Thank you for having me. Adagia.
Adagia. It's Italian. You got
I
to
think I
have
got it
that
right.
j sh mix. Adagia.
This was fun.
This was fun. Yeah. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for rescheduling on such short notice. This was supposed to be recorded yesterday, and then the tornado siren went off here. So, we couldn't record in that. So just Thanks.
Sure thing. Things happen, and I'm from a tornado-y part of the world, so I totally understand. So it was cool talking to you, and hit me up after for a rant or two.
Oh yeah, I gotta give you the Traitors in Salem rant that I'm not gonna put on YouTube because I like being positive. Dear
We
God.
appreciate it.
Dear God. Okay, I'm cutting the recording now.
Cut it.
Bye.
Bye.